How's it going, everybody? I'd like to give you guys an overview of the CCNP Route exam, the 300-101 exam that we're going to be kicking off here very, very shortly. The premise behind this exam is relatively straightforward. It's all about routing, right? So a lot of what we're going to be covering is going to be layer 3, almost half of the exam. It's right around 40% of the exam is layer 3 focused. There are going to be a few pieces to it that are going to be layer 2 focused, and we have plenty of layer 2 capabilities to work on that with, and we'll focus on those areas when we come to them. But mainly what we're going to be focusing on here is the fundamental aspects of how routing really works. Now, with that being said, I'm under the impression, and I'm assuming that you, the person watching this video, has at least a CCNA level of understanding when it comes to routing. And with that being also said, I am not going to take you down to the CCNA level, where I'm explaining what a MAC address is, what a layer 2 switch is, what ARP is. I'll bring those terms up as we go along, but I'm not going to go into great detail as to what exactly they mean, because I'm assuming that you have at least that level of understanding already. And the reason for that is because this is not a CCNA course, so I'm not going to go to that level. This is more of an advanced course, and for those of you that have been a frequenter of my YouTube channel for some time now, you would know that I have already recorded and published CCNP Route and Switch. I never did a T-shoot series. I was going to, but unfortunately I was steered to a consulting role that required an exorbitant amount of time, and I was unable to ever get around to actually kicking it off. So, and that was right around the time that I passed my CCNP, and I figured, why waste my time doing T-shoot when I could just start studying for my CCIE, which I've been doing now. I've been studying nonstop for almost 17 months for my CCIE. So at the time of this recording, I have not yet taken the CCIE lab, but I will make an announcement when I do, so that probably you'll hear conflicting information in some of the videos where I've taken my CCIE and I passed it, and I have a number, and so, but take stock in the fact that I have a CCNP, I've sat for these 3 exams, and I have been doing this professionally for the better part of 3.5 years. So everything that we're going to cover in this in the Route Switch and T-shoot series are going to be, there's going to be some personal experiences laid into it. So just wanted to get that out of the way as we're sitting here talking and you're sitting here listening. If anybody has any questions that they would like answered or anything like that, I will provide my contact info at the end of this video, and probably throughout the majority of the introductory video. I have not yet recorded that. That's the very last video that I do, only because of the fact that it basically, I recap what I've done through the series this way here, and that actually buys me a little bit of time because I haven't taken my lab yet, which is coming up very, very soon. So, but basically what I'm going to do here in this video is, like I mentioned, I'm going to go over what we're going to be covering, and how I'm going to take the different sections of the exam and fit them into different areas of the actual series. Now, this network principles piece right here, this is kind of a watered down, and let me actually bring this down just a little bit in size so it's a little easier for me to scroll here. This is a watered down version of what you would see for the CCIE. For the network principles section, there's some pieces missing in the CCNP, like quality of service and multicast, that I will touch on. I might go into a very, 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 very basic examples and talk about that type of stuff, just so it's a stepping stone, if you will. If it'd be like you know what quality of service is, you know what multicast is. I'm going to be touching on MPLS VPN. I will be touching on Dmvpn. I'll be touching IPsec. So there's going to be this is going to be a CCNP, if you will, plus series. So it's going to go into a little bit more detail. And I like is the fact that I've got that technical understanding now. So we're going to cover how all this stuff works, and I'll cover what the fib and the adjacency table are, and Unicast or out of order packets and asymmetric routing, and go from there on how that type of stuff works, and the different IP operations and stuff like that. Basically, anything that you would normally have an understanding from, say, maybe CompTIA's Network Plus, or Cisco CCNA, or maybe Juniper's JNCIA, or something along those lines. So very, very vendor. The only thing that's specific here is Ceph, which is Cisco Express Forwarding, and then obviously CDP, which we will cover what CDP is and how that operates. Then we're going to get into we're going to cover layer 2, which is very, very brief and not very complicated at all. I'm actually going to break it up into 2 videos where I'll do a strictly PPP video where I cover we will configure Pppoe. I actually have a couple of circuits that we can work with that, and I'm going to just describe them, because Pppoe, from what I've heard from people that have taken the exam, you're looking at configuration. You're not actually configuring anything. You're looking at, like, what would you do to do this? That's just what I've heard. I didn't actually sit for the 300 101 exam. I sat for the 642 902. I had to actually look over at the previous version. I passed the previous version of the CCNP. So we'll talk about that, and we'll go into detail on how that would work. It's relatively straightforward for the most part, but we'll still cover it. And then we have a fairly simple frame relay implementation that we're going to be working through. We're going to configure that and get it operating, how it works, what's the difference between point-to-point and multi-point frame relay, and we take a look at that, exactly how that works. It's actually very, very straightforward in the sense that it's every vendor can run it, so you should be familiar with it. The other piece that we're going to be covering is I'm going to segue with some of the addressing, and I'm going to cover IPv4 and IPv6 in 2 separate videos, but I'm going to break them up. So what I'm going to do is I'll do the addressing. I'll talk about unicast, broadcast, multicast, and variably length subnet masks, and then I'm also going to talk about ARP. I'm going to talk about it. I'm not going to go into a deep dive on how all the little caveats that you could do, and I will show you how to do a static ARP entry and stuff like that. And then we'll talk about how DHCP relay works. But I have a special layer 3 services section that I'm going to use, which is going to basically cover things like DHCP and some other pieces. Now, why they have it in here, I'm not really sure, because addressing and DHCP kind of, sort of interact with each other, but at the same point in time, they don't. Address types is different than you're actually addressing. So, what's ironic about it, though, is they have broadcast and they have unicast sitting next to each other here, and they have relay and server, which, if you receive a DHCP discover packet, that's a broadcast, and then if you have the IP helper address configured underneath an interface, that actually flips it from a broadcast to a unicast, and then forwards it to the IP address. And you actually have to have a route to the DHCP server's IP address, and you're going to note that IP address inside of the helper address configuration. So IP helper address and whatever the IP address of the DHCP server is. And then you can route that way. And then from there, it's all unicast back and forth between the end host and the DHCP server. So we'll take a look at that, exactly how that would work. We're probably going to configure it just so you guys can see how that would work. And it's rather simple. There's some key pieces in there that are actually very, very straightforward. And then we'll talk about how IPv6 piece works. Now I'm going to break these up to where this is going to be the IPv4 kickoff video, and then we're going to have an IPv6 kickoff video, because there are some definite differences between them and how they would work. And we'll talk about how what's ironic is I was just in a discussion with a client's senior engineer not too long ago, where we were discussing IPv6 SLAC, which is stateless address auto configuration, and then we have DHCP, those two are not the same. Where auto-config is, you're basically going out there and you're taking the MAC address, piping it into an address, and then away you go. And then with DHCP, you're actually calling out to a DHCP server, so DHCPv6, and how those pieces would work, and the EUI64 address, and neighbor discovery, and router solicitation, and router advertisement, how these pieces will work in. I'm going to break them up. These three right here will pretty much go together, because they're very similar to what this is right here with the ARP and addressing types. And then DHCP relay and stuff like that will go into the IPv6 services. And then we're going to do, obviously, static and default routing are going to be very straightforward. I'll talk about the difference between Eigrp and Ripp versus Ospf and ISIS versus BGP. And I did that on purpose so you would know what the different protocols are. Because regardless of what anybody has told you, Eigrp is still a distance vector routing protocol. It's a routing by rumor type of forwarding capability, and how it learns its routes from its neighbors. Then we'll talk about some of the other features, but this is going to be after we actually get into the details. So all this stuff right here that you see, 3.6 through, let me highlight this, 3.6 through, let's see what else we have down here. A lot of this other stuff right here, all this stuff right here that you see, 3.6 through 3.15, this is going to be more or less after you've covered the bulk of the topics. And the reason for that is because you and I are going to need to know what's going on with the protocols before we start trying to filter stuff in the protocol. So that's going to be one of those things where if you don't know really what's going on behind the scenes, you can run into problems. And then we have route maps, and again, route maps are pretty cool. If you know how to use them, great. If you don't, we'll talk about that. And then we'll get into, could be doing a very, very small Ripp deployment, like literally just a couple of routers that are going to be, I think I'm going to start out with Eigrp, and I'll put them in the Eigrp section. I didn't think that I needed to have a dedicated area for Ripp. So I'll do Ripp, I'll show you guys how to authenticate it and how to do some different things with it. And then I will show you to do Ripp for IPv6. It's I had to be quite honest with you guys. This Ripp and Ripp.ng are, I don't mean to sound condescending or negative in any way, but they're stupid simple to work with. But at the same point in time, they are still applicable in today's environments. There are some clients that I work with that are very small insurance companies. You know, you might have like a little mom and pop. You know, let's say for instance, I live in the Milwaukee area, so we'll say a small city in there could be Greenfield, Wisconsin. And for instance, they might have Greenfield Insurance. So Greenfield Insurance obviously is going to be a very small insurance company compared to say like Allstate or State Farm. You know, a very large insurance company. So they might have maybe 2 offices, and you want to run, they might be right next to each other. And then you want to run Ripp internally because you have maybe a wireless router that's routing, and then you have an edge router that's doing your BGP or your cable modem routing. You might want to run Ripp there, or you might have a little bit bigger company. Maybe you might have a small manufacturing company that you want to work with. And for instance, Ospf and Eigrp aren't supported on their equipment. So realistically speaking, Ripp might be the only way you could go with that. And consequently, a lot of the customers I work with that are really, really small, Ripp is all they can work with. So we'll talk about how that works, and that'll be like literally 1 video. Or, I'm lying. It might be 2. I'm teasing you guys. It'll actually probably be a little more than that because there is some actual content to Ripp that I will need to go over. But in all essences, it's very, very lightweight. And then we'll get into Eigrp. Now, Eigrp, as you can see, is these topic ranges right here, right? So this is all Eigrp. We'll talk about the different packet types for Eigrp. I'll show you I'll do some debugs and stuff like that. We'll configure neighbor relationships and authentication. I'll talk about how I'll talk about the classic mode Eigrp and then the named mode Eigrp because I know a lot of clients are going to that way. Now, We'll talk about stub routing and how that works and all the different variations of that. What is a stub? Why would you use it? Then we'll talk about load balancing, equal cost versus unequal cost, and this right here to me is a 4-letter word, but we'll cover it just because of the fact it's on the blueprint. And the reason why I don't like unequal cost load balancing is because of the fact that it typically goes hand in hand with out of order packets, because you're going to be sending some traffic, the bulk of your traffic over the fast link, and only a portion of your the smaller portion of your traffic over a slower speed link. And the drawback to that is if you have like a SIP deployment, if you have like if you're doing like hosted voice over IP where you don't have your call servers internally, you're subscribing to a service for that. I've ran into problems with SIP deployments with out of order packets, and so it's not cool. So we'll talk about how to the metrics and how you can manipulate that, and we'll talk about Eigrp for v6. It's again very, very easy to get going. You'll be surprised. Eigrp or all of the IPv6 protocols are very, very simple to get working. It's just understanding the different caveats. And then of course we have Ospf. We'll talk about Ospf in a little bit more detail. It's gonna be a little bit bigger topic scope because there's more to Ospf than there is to Eigrp. We'll talk about all the different capabilities that are out there for that, and then we'll get into we're going to spend a significant amount of time in the database, the network types, the LSA types, what a virtual link is, path preference based on cost, and if you're going to use a different route type and how it works, and then we'll get into Ospf IPv6 Ospf and then Ospf 3. There are some differences between the two, and we'll talk about how that would work. And then we're going to get into BGP. BGP isn't super complicated, but we're going to talk about how that would work, and we'll talk about the different what a peer group is, and active versus passive peers, and states and timers. And realistically speaking, there's not a ton to work on, so I will go into more detail on that as we go along. Then we have external BGP. This is more iBGP right here, and then we have our eBGP. Sorry, what a private autonomous system is versus a 4-byte AS, what AS dot notation, and then we'll talk about the different address families and how you go in there and manipulate that. And we'll talk about the best path selection process. I'm going to probably cover the top 5 or 6. So I'll cover weight, I'll cover AS path, I'll cover locally originated routes, I'll talk about local preference, I'll talk about the med, I'll talk about that's probably as far as I'll go with how that would work, but just be aware that you can do that. And we'll talk about communities and how you can try to trigger upstream neighbors to do something based on what you tell them. And this is pretty typical of mid-sized companies that are dual homed, and you want to try to affect your route, your outbound traffic out one way, and you want to try to influence the ISP to route traffic in a different direction, things like that. And then we'll talk about VPN technologies, which VPN technologies aren't going to be very, very complicated. Now it says configure and verify Gre. That's literally 3 freaking commands on 2 different routers. The tunnel source, tunnel destination, and then the IP address. You're going to be working on it, and then you're going to do the same thing on the other end. As long as you have a route to the other end, your tunnel is going to come up. And depending on how you do things, the tunnel might be the preferred method to get preferred way to get there. So we'll talk about how that would work. And in all honesty, this right here, once we've covered this, Dmvpn is going to fall right into place. And I'm going to talk about Dmvpn. I'll show you guys how to route Ospf over it versus Eigrp. I spent a significant amount of time on Dmvpn, so it should be fairly straightforward to cover, and how you would work with that. Basically, you're enhancing a Gre tunnel. This is really what you're doing. Then we'll talk about easy virtual networking or EVN, not EVPN, but EVN, where you're going to be using things like tagging and VNets and things like that, to where this is going to go kind of hand in hand with VRF Lite, which we'll talk about coming up. And VRF Lite is one of those topics where, if you're not familiar with VRFs, you will be by the time we're done here. And VRFs aren't complicated. You just to give you guys a little tidbit, they are like a VLAN is to a switch, a VRF is to a router. So once you created the VRF, you basically created the new routing table, and you need to associate an interface to a VRF, and then you basically segregated that interface from the global routing table, which is basically the same thing as if you have VLAN 1 as the default VLAN on any Cisco switch. So is the global routing table, which is the default VRF. So you take that into consideration. There's a little bit more details to it with VRFs, because then you get into some more advanced features and capabilities. But at the end of the day, it's very, very easy to work with, and I've spent a lot of time on them because of the fact that, and I'll actually show you a topology that I'm working on. It's a mock lab that I'm actually writing, and it's because my CCIE is coming up very soon. I'm using this to test myself on some features just to keep the knowledge fresh. Because unfortunately, with the CCIE side of the house, there's a absolute huge topic domain. So everything I'm talking about with you here is stuff that I've pretty much covered already. So we'll get into how that type of stuff works, and then we'll get into infrastructure security, which isn't too complicated. We'll talk about what AAA is, and TACACS and Radius, which TACACS is Cisco proprietary and Radius is open source. And we'll talk about local privilege authorization fallback, which simply means when you're configuring AAA, you're going to make sure that if you can't reach AAA, you're going to go to a local database. That's basically what that means. Then we'll talk about locking down the different access controls. So how would you control your control plane versus your management plane, which is pretty much the same thing, but there are some differences. We'll talk about password encryption, and then we'll talk about different access control lists that there are. We'll talk about how the standard versus extended versus time-based, which you configure a time range, and then you attach that to a ECL. IPv6 traffic filters, and everybody's favorite topic, Unicast reverse path forwarding, which means if it left out an interface, it's going to come back into the interface. Different ways you can work with that. And then we'll get into some of the services. And this is where we're going to spend some time with SNMP and DHCP. And like I said, I don't understand why they put DHCP relay and stuff like that in with the addressing when it really has nothing to do with addressing. In the regards to the way that the address types and stuff like that. To me, that belongs. Anything DHCP belongs here. So when we actually get into the details of how that works, we'll talk about some of the pieces that, like the server and the relay and the client ID and that type of stuff gets into play, and how you can associate that type of stuff, and we'll go from there. Now, let me just come down to the bottom here, and that should be the end of it. And we'll talk about a lot of this stuff. Ironically, and this is very interesting, a lot of if you can go through your CCNP routing and switching, especially the CCNP route and CCNP switch, if you can go through both exams and go through it in such a manner that you go way overboard in your preparation. So when you go to the exam, when you go take your CCNP exam and you sit for it, you get like a 990 or a 1000 on your score, and you knew way more than what you needed to for that exam. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a hint. A lot of the material that we're going to be covering here is already covered in the you're going to be covering again in CCIE, but just a little bit more detail. And quite frankly, everything that you see on your screen right now is stuff that you will see in your CCIE. Everything you see here is going to be covered. So that's why I'm telling you, not so much the lab exam or the written exam, because I haven't sat for the lab. I took the written, but everything you're going to see here is covered in just a bit more detail in the CCIE piece than it is here. But if you spend a lot more time covering the services side in CCNP, you'll pretty much be good to go for CCIE. And that's like straight up the level that I'm going to take you to on this stuff right here is the same level I've taken CCIE to. So A lot of this stuff I'm going to take you a little bit farther in DHCP than I need to, but the same thing with NTP, same thing with NAT, with IPv6 NAT. A lot of that type of stuff is very, very straightforward, but and same thing with NetFlow. Like everything in here, I'm going to take you to the CCIA level on, because the fact that there's really not much more. Once you've learned about a few things, you're pretty much good to go. I would recommend going through it a couple times just to make sure you understand what's going on. But realistically speaking, that's what's up. So now that I've gone over the exam topics with you, there's a question: where is a VRF Lite covered? Right here. It's a routing. How can I put that? It's a non-protocol specific routing capability, if that makes sense. So that's what we're going to be doing. And let me minimize the screen here. And this is going to be our topology. Now, the way that I've built this topology is relatively straightforward. What you will be covering in this in here is going to be set up into a couple different pieces. We have our Ospf implementation over here. We have our Eigrp implementation over here. We have a couple of ISPs that we're going to be pairing with, and I will be going over how you can manipulate different things with that. Now, with all this being stated, what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be covering Ripp, and I'm probably just going to run Ripp between these two routers right here, 8 and 9. And then what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to run through Eigrp and get all this Eigrp running. And then including we'll do like frame relay and point-to-point protocol and things like that. And then we're going to slowly get into our IGPs. Then we're going to get then we'll run, once we have frame relay working and everything's going good with that, then I will get the routing protocol working over that. And then what we'll do from there is we'll do the IGP here. Then we'll do Ospf, and then we'll get Ospf running, and then we'll get Ospf running over frame relay here, because this is actually a frame relay router. It just says R14. I will put in like parentheses. I don't know. Can I change the symbol to be a frame relay switch? Apply. Okay, perfect. That works out just well. Change symbol, frame switch, apply. Cool. So frame switch. It's actually a 3725 on the back end, but that's kind of arbitrary. And then what we're going to do from there, once we have those two pieces in play, then we're going to get into route redistribution. So I will extend the Ospf boundary to R6 and R13. I will extend the Eigrp boundary from R7 to R6 and R13, and we'll talk about redistribution. Then once we have that down pat, we understand how redistribution works, we do some filtering, and we understand how route leaking and route feedback works, then I'm going to rip the protocols out. So I'll rip Ospf out of these links here, and we'll go back to Ospf being up to here and Eigrp being up to here, and I will then deploy BGP, and we'll peer BGP between these two sites. And we'll talk about how redistribution would work if we have the IGP to BGP and BGP to the IGP, and go back and forth. And then we will, once we have that situated, we'll talk about the best path selection process. And we'll talk about how all that type of stuff works. We'll get into the address families, and we'll be doing some route reflection for BGP. I'm not going to get into confederations or anything like that, because that's more of a service provider capability, but I'll describe it and I'll give you an idea of how it would work. And then from there, we would be getting into the VPN section. So we'll do like a GRE tunnel between 5 and 7, and show you guys how that would work and how we prefer going over 5 and then going over the tunnel versus going over BGP, and stuff like that. And then what we'll do then is we'll get into Dmvpn. So I'll configure Dmvpn on 5, 16, and 17. And then I'll pretty much match that configuration over here. So we'll have two different Dmvpn tunnel or clouds, and this will allow us to route an IGP over the Dmvpn cloud. So, for instance, I might do like I'm thinking here, BGP between the sites, because it might be BGP or DMVP. I'm not sure yet. I'll have to figure that piece out yet. I'll let you know when we get there. And then we'll have Ospf over Dmvpn, and then we'll have Eigrp over Dmvpn. You can see how the two to work in accordance, then we'll throw some IPsec in there, and I'll explain how IPsec works. And then once we have all that done, I'm going to jump into some EVN, and then we'll talk about how Ethernet virtual networks work, or sorry, easy virtual networking. We'll talk about how you can have multiple VRFs and going across, and we'll do some .1q trunking, and we'll set up some .1q interfaces between these guys so we can talk about how that would work. And then we'll get into what was that last piece? I completely forgot. Once we get through EVN, we'll get into security. We'll talk about AAA, and we'll configure it. I'll show you guys how that works, and then we'll get into some access control and control plane policing and things like that. Excuse me. And then we'll get into like setting up DHCP and HTTPS and SSH and stuff like that, and go from there. And how you can do TFTP across, and a lot of that type of stuff will come into play. That'll be very, very straightforward. And then we'll get into NTP, and we'll start doing some NAT and NAT 64. And there's a question: is NAT 64 the protocol you would use on the internet to bridge V4 to V6? It's actually the other way around. It's actually bridge V6 to V4, and the reason, and this is where it's usually known as NAT 6 to 4, and NAT protocol translation. And basically, what you're doing is, if you're routing, let's say for instance you got an IPv6 global address, so 2001 something or other, and we'll talk about the general prefix too, not to throw you off or anything, but basically what ends up happening is you have a global IPv6 address at home. So you're running native V6 at home or at your office or what have you, and you're trying to reach Google DNS on Quad 8 addressing, so 8.8.8.8. Well, the problem with that being is you can't translate 6 to 4 unless you have some sort of translation technique enabled to do so. So when IPv6 went live for IPv6 Day back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013. I think it was 2012 they went NAT IPv6 Day, and then a year later, almost to the date, I believe it was, sometime in June or July of 2013, they went V6 went live. And what they did was Cisco had a bunch of NAT PT routers set up to where they would receive the V6 address in, they translate that to a V4 address, and then that NAT capability would go from V6 to V4, and then it would resolve what you're looking for. So it would take that 2001, dead beef, whatever address you have, and then they would translate it to 8.8.8.8. And then you would be able to pull that in, and then you would type in Quad 8, it would get translated from V4 to V6, and because you're, well, depending on how you have your implementation set up. And then it would pull your Google web page up. To you, it was all seamless. There was nothing in between that you didn't have to type in a, do you want to translate this? Yes, I do. Or click a button. None of that was there. It was all behind the scenes done. You didn't know anything about it. So that's where this comes into play. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. I think it's April 2015 right now. I believe 15% of the internet is routed via IPv6. I think that's what the statistic is. Actually, I could look that up. Give me 1 second. Okay, well, this is the Pppoe.net, which basically kind of gives you a insight as to what's going on inside of the BGP table. As you can see, in '94 there was not very many routes, and here it is. It's end of April 2015, and we're at 550,000 routes. It's pretty big. Now, if we look at BGP table, we have, right now there are 548,000 routes that are BGP for IPv4 via AppNIC, and then 22,000 of those routes are IPv6. Now, if we go to IPv4, or I'm sorry, IPv6. Let's see, comparative table, comparative report. They say that what's that, 15%? I don't usually look at this, so just curiosity. Let's see here. So let's do a quick calculator. Look this up on the calculator. Let's do calculator. There's a question. Why am I spending the time? I'm just curious myself. So we're going to go 548,957. Divide that by 22498. Obviously that's not a quarter. Oh, well, there's the answer. Less than 1%. Because 1% would be 54,000. Or 54,000? 10% would be 54,000. So it's... Oh, I'm sorry, I did the other way around. Sorry, I apologize. So 22,498 divided by 548,957 is less than well, that'll be less than 5%. 5% of the internet. So that's what's going on there. So no real big deal with that, but that's going to be way outside of the scope. There's a question: am I going to be doing any heavy-duty BGP route injection? Probably not, and the reason for that is because there's really no reason to. And quite frankly speaking, if I was to do a bunch of BGP route injection, your head would start to spin. So let me pause the video again. I'll pull up my current CCIE lab topology just to give you guys an idea of what the differences look like. Okay, so this is my CCIE lab that I have on. I have it set up on a remote computer, that I have running in ESXi, and basically what we have here. And I'm not going to go into any real detail, but this is what I have set up for my CCIE prep. So I have this guy right here is doing a lot of route injection, and I think I have like 300 routes that I've created. I basically just went into Notepad and I just started creating a bunch of routes, and I just started copying and pasting, and before you knew it, I had a bunch of routes that actually a bunch of loopbacks that I did, and I just redistributed connected, and that's how they're getting into BGP. And then I'm doing a bunch of ISP to ISP BGP, and so a lot of this stuff is the BGP table is rather heavy because I'm doing a lot of BGP route filtering and stuff like that. So as you can see, it's a rather in-depth setup, and I'm doing a lot of inter VLAN switching and stuff like that. So this is going to be a mock lab. I figured I'd just throw it out there so you guys can see how this would look down the road. But this is it's kind of a hybrid design. I wanted to do something unique as I was trying this stuff out, and this is definitely CCIE lab size. I've got 7 ISPs. Yeah, 7 ISP routers. So these 3 up here and these 4 down at the bottom. I have these 7 ISPs, and then I have a couple of core sites. I have I believe I haven't actually dedicated it yet. I haven't put all the markings in here yet. So, like for instance, this guy would be like your data center or a data center backup and you're doing a bunch of MPLS. So I got a bunch of MPLS VPNs, and I'm peering with frame relay. It's not actually frame relay, but it'll be a bunch of PPP circuits that I have here. So, and realistically speaking, this is the size networks that I'm building and testing myself on. So when I go, and nothing against you guys for the CCNP stuff, but this is more the level that you guys should be at for complexity. So to me, this is very straightforward. So we have an Ospf design, and we're going to be doing some virtual links and how that would all come into play, and we'll see exactly how that would play out. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. It's up to me to explain how this stuff works, and if I can't show you guys that I'm way beyond this, then I don't think I would be qualified to teach it, because I don't think a CCNP is qualified just to teach CCNP. you may disagree with that, but I'm way beyond CCNP. So, but with that being said, you know, it's my personal preference. So I enjoy teaching, so hopefully I can pass that along to you guys, and you guys will enjoy what's going on. There's a question. There's no dedicated addressing. Well, actually, I have the addressing space up here. So basically, what I'm doing here is it's going to be 172.16. You know, XX would be the router number, and then /27. And then what I'm doing here is literally all you do here is it'd be like 124 or 142 or 214 or something like that. And then it'd be 172.16.23, 172.16.35, and then, you know, the lab is actually what I should say in here that I haven't is all loopbacks are 10.255.x.x/32. All x's x's equal router number. So if you can understand that, you should be pretty straightforward. That's the topology overview and stuff like that. There's a question. You were just trying to show up your lab. I kind of was. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it's. It's not about trying to, you know, one up anybody or, you know, show anything like that. It's just to give you guys a comparison. You know. Well, there's another question. Am I going to be releasing a .NET file? I will be. I absolutely will be. And for those of you that are watching this in a recorded format, there's a couple of friends of mine that knew that I was going to be doing this and asked me if they could just chat in questions and stuff like that, and they're listening through Google Hangout. So once I'm done with my CCIE, which will be happening relatively soon, I don't want to give any particular a time frame or a date, because if I fail, I don't want anybody to know. But hopefully sooner than later I will pass, and I will have a CCIE number, and then I will be introducing the new series for Route Switch and T-Shoot as a CCIE, and that's actually one of my goals. And so, but yeah, that's for those of you that you're using CCNP as a segue. I think that's a great way to do it, because CCNP is CCIE is that much more complicated, and there's a big knowledge gap between CCNP and CCIE. And as I mentioned, I passed my CCNP a year and a half ago, almost to the date, or thereabouts. So in the last 18 months, I have taken what I learned from CCNP and I've just added a bunch of knowledge to that. So we're going to be talking about a lot of the stuff in CCNP. So I think it'll be a good place for a start-off piece for a lot of people, because if you're coming from a CCNA, that CCIE is like one of those, you know, you don't even see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. That's how much more technical skills you have to earn. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as it's a long-term goal. And one of the things that I was actually told by somebody when I told them I was going after my CCIE that, oh, so you want to be a know-it-all? And I kind of, well, it is an expert level certification, yes, and he was studying for his CCNP. So, technically speaking, yes, when you're an expert, you are a know-it-all. But when you start studying CCIE, you realize how much you really don't know, and there is a lot of information out there I haven't even scratched the surface on. So, for instance, like service provider, data center, security, wireless, I'm associate level at best with all of those technologies. So, when you break it down, there is a lot of pieces that I've never even touched with other tracks. So, I would be a know-it-all in routing switching, yes. That's why I feel like I'm more than qualified to teach these courses. But at the end of the day, for data center or service provider, I have a long way to go. And, you know, that just goes to show you, once you hit CCIE for one track, you should be striving for your second, third, fourth, and fifth, if you will. If you want to be like guys like Brian Dennis or guys like Brian McGann from INE. Those guys are, I aspire to be like them one day, because of the fact of what their technical understanding, their technical level, the amount of CCIEs that they've achieved. That's what I consider to be a true expert. And I'm working my way up there, but it takes time to get there. So I encourage anybody that's watching this, and the people that are watching this live, definitely be, don't let anybody discourage you. And to me personally, if that person doesn't have an equal or greater certification level than you, they really have no room to stand, no room to talk, because that's, don't let anybody deter you. I mean, that's my best advice. And the reason why I say that is because if I would have let people, my friends and my coworkers, if I would have listened to them, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So, I don't let anybody tell me I can't do something. And if, God forbid, you tell me you can't do something, God forbid it, because I'm going to say, okay, challenge accepted. And I'm going to go out there and I'm going to learn it, and I'm going to show you up, and I'm going to go head to head with you in front of a classroom full of people, or a presentation room, and I'm going to smoke you. And that, to me, because it's once you told me I can't do something, you basically have, you told me I'm not good enough, and that's not going to happen. And I will show you up. I mean, there is a little bit of ego in there too, because it's like, oh, you can't tell me I can't do something? Watch. Nobody said you can't do CCIE. CCIE has been a goal of mine now for 2.5 years now, ever since I met one. And he pretty much gave me some insight and said, okay, this is what you need to do. I was like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. And, that's pretty much where I've been. So I'm going to back off the soapbox a little bit, because I know you guys don't want to listen to me, talk about, that type of stuff. But I feel like if you understand where I'm coming from, and that I do this because I enjoy it, not because I want, not because I'm being paid to, because YouTube doesn't pay me. Well, there is some small monetary benefit from it, but not very much. Like if you were to look at the royalties I get from my videos, not much at all. So I'm hoping one day it'll turn into a full-time or maybe a part-time teaching position somewhere. But right now, I feel like people should be a little bit more forthcoming with their knowledge, and I'm trying to do that. So anyway, I'm going to get out the soapbox. You guys can go on, carry on with your day, and hopefully everything will work out. There is one other question here. It says, are you going to break down what areas are going to, or what connections in Ospf are going to be in what areas? I will, but you can pretty much be guaranteed that that'll be pretty straightforward once you get to it. And once we get into Ospf, I will break that down. So yes, that will be what's a good way to put that? That will be discussed. So I hope everybody enjoyed this, and I would like to thank you for viewing, and hopefully next time we'll see you around for the next round. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.